Welcome to Greenable Woodbridge. I'm your host, Carolyn Ehrlich. Today's topic is climate change and resiliency. And to help me talk about that, I've turned to my friends from Sustainable Jersey. And for those of you who watch the show often, you always hear me talking about Sustainable Jersey and what a great resource it is for towns to actually know how to become greener. Well, they're also a great resource for people who are doing TV shows and are looking for experts. Because today I have with me Randy Solomon, who is the co-director of Sustainable Jersey, and he is really the expert on everything that towns do to become greener. He, from before it was even an idea, he worked with few mayors, people from Rutgers, people from DEP, to form the Sustainable Jersey program. And now he goes throughout the country talking about energy, resiliency, land use, and ways that government can, as they make their decisions, think about sustainable indicators and practices to make the better decisions. And Linda has been working at Sustainable Jersey, Linda Weber, as the director of Resiliency. And she comes with a vast background in this area. She's a licensed planner with 25 years of experience. She actually worked for FEMA during Sandy, helping our communities rebound and recover from Sandy. And since then, she's been working in many, many areas on this whole issue of resiliency. And certainly here in Woodbridge, many of our residents lived it in real life as that hurricane hit and the aftermath of it. So it's a good opportunity for us to talk about and have the rest of the people in Woodbridge understand what that small part of the town went through and help us as we move forward. So first of all, let's talk about climate change. You know, how is that impacting New Jersey and Woodbridge?
Well, climate change refers to not only the global warming, but it's a whole host of issues that are generated by this global warming. So we're talking about climate change, we're talking about the increase in temperatures, we're talking about ice melting, the glaciers melting, the warming of the ocean, all combining to increase sea level rise. We're talking about a vast number of other issues, some that we will experience, each and every one of us, but to varying degrees, depends upon where we live and our situation. But for climate change, though, we're also talking about increase in precipitation. So the difference between now and perhaps 20, 25 years ago is we're going to see bursts of precipitation. So it'll be increased amounts, whether it's snow or it's rain, and then in the summer months you'll see them spaced in between those precipitation. You'll see longer periods of drought. So I mean, this is particularly important. Well, the drought is of concern, but the heavier precipitation will, for Woodbridge, means there will be more stormwater management problems. So we're also looking at, well, obviously the increase in temperature itself. They're forecasting temperatures greater than 95 or 100 by mid-century. There'll probably be 15 to 20 more days of extreme heat. They're talking about probably increasing the or exceeding the heat record for New Jersey probably by mid-century. So of course that's of concern for people who don't have air conditioning, for our elderly, our children, people who are sensitive to heat. What you want to add some?
Sure. The changing temperature and climate, and by the way, I have a little bit of laryngitis, so I apologize to you and your viewers. I'll do my best. That it's going to change the complement of species that live here, but that includes the types of fish that are in the ocean. So, for example, we can expect lobsters in the offshore New Jersey fishery to migrate north. They will literally just walk north. But we can also expect
some to come north from
potentially, like for example, summer fluke. We could get a better summer fluke fishery. But the problem is once those migrations start, you don't know what's going to happen. So it sort of introduces chaos that could result in entire species disappearing. But in terms of impacting human health, we're going to see, for example, better and more fertile ground for breeding mosquitoes and for invasive types of mosquitoes. So, for example, the Asian tiger mosquito, which is a relatively new invasive species in New Jersey. So those are kind of striped mosquitoes. They're a little bit more aggressive. They don't come out at dawn and dusk like the traditional New Jersey mosquitoes. They come out right at noon. They're more likely to carry diseases. You're going to see them become increasingly happy in New Jersey and breeding in greater numbers. And then, of course, that means that they're a vector for diseases that are going to become happier in New Jersey. So malaria, dengue fever, yellow fever, these are all things that are currently not in New Jersey. West Nile virus did not used to be in New Jersey. It's now in New Jersey. We expect to see an increased prevalence of that. And then if you look at other types of species like the emerald ash beetle or the pine beetle, the emerald ash borer or the pine beetle. These are invasive species that are going to change the complement of our forests. So they're going to drive out certain species. So we can expect just a lot of change and having to deal with that change. So like for a town like Woodbridge, what street trees are you planting? Are you planting street trees that are adapted to the pests of today and the temperature ranges of today? Or are you planting trees that are adapted to, considering you hope these trees are going to last 50 or 100 years, are they adapted to the climate and the pests that are going to be here in 20 years and in 50 years?
Probably not even thinking about that.
Exactly. So there's just a long list of things to think about. And then Linda mentioned sea level rise and mentioned the change in the character of storms. So precipitation is going to be coming in a smaller number of more intense storms. So that's going to increase flooding. And that's sort of the inland storms like Hurricane Irene, right? With sort of rain. But then there's Sandy type storms, which are coastal storms. And so we expect to see more intense and more frequent storms. We can't say exactly how much. But we can say with a greater degree of certainty how much the ocean is going to rise. And so the ocean is going to rise. And I don't know, does Woodbridge have parts of its coast that are tidally influenced?
Yes, very much so.
So
and even our creeks and rivers are tidally influenced.
Right. So by the year 2030, we expect somewhere in the range of a foot or a little less than a foot, and by 2100,
it'd be 1.4 feet approximately. Those are the best estimates as of today.
And that's why FEMA is changing their maps and telling us to raise our flood levels and build houses higher and everything?
Well, that's actually not true because FEMA doesn't take into account sea level rise yet. So they're actually, that didn't have anything to do with Sandy. It just was a coincidence of their timing
maps came out
that they just happened to update their maps and they had delayed it for so long. Right. But so the sea level is rising. So although Sandy was a little bit of an anomaly, what you're going to see is some more storms similar to Sandy because the storms are actually maybe not increasing in frequency, but the intensity is going to be increasing. So you're going to see greater storm or wind speed, again, more precipitation.
Larger storm surge.
Yeah, and so that on top of the increasing level of the sea rise means there's going to be greater flooding. So if you take a look at the maps and you look at Woodbridge and you can see the areas around the Woodbridge River and the Raritan River and where they're flooding now, they flooded during Sandy and they will continue to flood. So
were people saying that only happened once and I don't expect it to happen again because I've lived here for 50 years, so it's probably never going to happen again. What you're saying is you can count on it happening again.
That's right. And we still...
It's like gambling. So, people talk about the 100-year storm as really the event that you have to game plan for.
Right.
Sandy was roughly enough, the 100-year storm. What sea level rise and what climate change is doing is, if you imagine a wheel that you're spinning that's got 100 spots, you're still spinning that wheel every year. There's a 1% chance every year, but now you're just making the wheel smaller and smaller. So there's not 100 spots, now there's 75 spots, now there's 50 spots, now there's 25 spots, but you're still, at any given year, you're still just spinning that wheel.
Yeah, and you just don't know.
You just don't know.
So it sounds grim, But there's plenty of things that we could be doing now, though, to prepare for it. So there's no need to panic.
Right.
There's plenty of tools out there. There's things that we could be doing today, tomorrow, and in the years.
I'd say panic.
And in the decades to come.
That's Randy. He always says panic.
We want to control panic, but I think, look.
This is our dog and pony show.
Well, there's a call to action here. I mean,
Yes.
So, I mean,
Right.
and we're talking about climate change. We haven't talked much about things that people and communities, and of course the state and federal government can do to limit climate change. And just to put to take a step back and put it in context, we're experiencing climate change. We're going to experience climate change, regardless of whether or not we completely eliminate all greenhouse gases. However, we can still try to avoid the worst effects of catastrophic climate change. We can bend the curve and we can limit the impact. So there's a difference between having climate change that we're going to have to take real steps to adapt to,
Right.
that we're going to have to struggle with, and we are going to have to struggle with, and climate change that really, but and I don't want to be overly dramatic, so I'll just leave it at that. But so what scientists refer to as quote unquote catastrophic climate change can still
Right.
be avoided. So we still need to lower our greenhouse gas emissions, lower our energy consumption, and take meaningful steps there. And Woodbridge has been a leader in doing that, and we hope to continue to partner with you to come up with new strategies there. But then there's the resilient side, which is saying, whatever may come, we want to adopt policies and strategies and build in such a way and make investments in such a way that we are going to be resilient, that we are going to have the best chance for good outcomes regardless of what comes down the pike. And that's what resiliency is talking about. And so we need to plan for the climate change that we have a very high probability of knowing that it's going to happen already.
So, and I
we
think
need to start now.
that's really the key. It's interesting because before Sandy, people like you were having that discussion, but it wasn't a general discussion. So, I'm a believer in everything bad, something good comes out of it. And now we're talking about resiliency, and we all recognize we have to do things to be ready for it. So what are some of the things that they're doing on a state level, we can do locally?
I'll want to start again.
Well, I think I'll start with the local, because that's where my focus has really been. One of the things that we did at Sustainable Jersey, if you Google resiliency tools, you'll come up with a wide variety of different tools, plans, ordinances, and all. But many of them are actually tailored to large urban areas. They're not really specific to New Jersey. They don't reflect the home rule, or they don't reflect the planning, enabling legislation we have. So what we did is we created a path that municipalities can take for resiliency, and it's called the Municipal Resilience Cycle. So it has different phases. It's a kind of a pie shape, has 5 different phases in it, and the idea is to help municipalities move around the cycle, because it's a constant iterative process of always looking at climate change and doing little things here and there, and then larger things on occasion. So within that cycle, we start with emergency preparedness, vulnerability assessments, identifying options for adaptation strategies, implementing them, and then evaluating your progress and looking at new data and new conditions. And then it's, this cycle goes on and on again. So Woodbridge has a leg up already. It's already done several of these things, and it's really great.
And I have to give Pat Kenny and Stacy Hoffman a plug there, because they are our emergency management people.
That's great.
We have been leaders, at least in the county.
Right.
I know, with the plan and implementing the plan. And
right.
We all had a level of comfort, Sandy, that at least we had these professionals there working.
That's
and
right.
continuing to. So.
And in fact, one of the tools that we promote is called Getting to Resilience. So you did that last year, I believe.
Right.
And that's a self-assessment where you just took a look at all your plans and policies and said, do we have evacuation routes? Do we have ways to reach to the community, whether they speak English or not, or whether they have internet or not, to alert them of emergencies? Do we have a chain of command in case something happens? Or do we have a relocation? So it asks all these questions. And so you've completed that. And maybe the next step, if there's any spots where you said no on, you maybe could incorporate that into an action plan. One of the next tools that we're pretty proud of, we're working on a template for a coastal vulnerability assessment. So I use the term coastal loosely, so it's coastal and tidal waters which are affected by.
Right.
But the vulnerability assessment, and Woodbridge just recently told us they'd be happy to participate in that as well, so we're really excited.
Right, yeah.
So this is a tool that fills a gap in New Jersey. DEP came up with a template for vulnerability assessment, but it was GIS mapping based and it was relatively high level. So we took that tool and we took it to the next level. And what it does is it does use GIS mapping, but it assesses the vulnerability and risks of specific assets within the community, whether they're neighborhoods, public buildings, the libraries, the shelters, utilities, infrastructure, emergency facilities, rescue, and police. And it looks at them through the lens of different flood scenarios. So we'll be looking at, we'll have maps out on the table. We're looking at sea level rise, different years. We're looking at storm surge, and seeing where we have the use of LIDAR on the map so we can see the depth of water that's projected. And then we start having a discussion with the township officials about, well, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. And so what we call it is beyond the wet foot analysis. In other words, it's not just whether it's going to get flooded or not, but what does that really mean? Mm-hmm. Can the services still be provided? Can
right.
people still access the structure? How long will it be down for? Can groceries still be mm-hmm. provided right. and transported to the grocery store? And then we go into the natural areas as well, and what happens when the water inundates marshlands or tidal mm-hmm. areas. So it's a really in-depth analysis, and it provides the data for you as a township then to take it to the final step in prioritizing right. areas that are at risk and of value to the entire community, and you could start to prioritize projects.
So to use an example that's local, right now our public works facility is pretty much right on the Raritan River. And so when we heard the storm was coming, they wisely, unlike New Jersey Transit, they moved all the equipment more inland. Mm-hmm. But this kind of assessment would say it's more than just, well, your equipment, whatever, but you would probably recommend move public works.
Right.
Well, I think what it does is it looks at the key assets of the town. And as Linda said, some of them might be specific buildings or pieces of infrastructure. Some of it might be a neighborhood or economic mm-hmm. Development area or your downtown. Right. And says, what's the function of that? Why do we care about it? Mm-hmm. And how will that function be degraded by this flooding? So it might just be that your public works area is really just a big shed and the equipment is all mobile and you can move it out and move it back and it's not a big deal.
Right.
Maybe that's the answer,
mm-hmm.
but maybe that's not the answer. So the question is to really say, okay, if we spin that wheel mm-hmm. and we hit bingo, in 2030, let's really look at where the water would be, how deep it would be, where else it would be in the town, and say, okay, now let's look at the Public Works Center and say, what's the reality of what's going to happen here?
Right.
So we have more concrete answers.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is to set you up for a next phase of really thinking through what are our priorities,
right.
where do we have to make investments, where do we have serious problems that we've got to fix, and how can you, again, triage and sort of prioritize those investments.
Right. And so would this be able to tell us, we know how far the surges went in the different areas with mm-hmm. Sandy. Mm-hmm. Would this say the probability of a surge going further inland, what those probabilities are, and then draw kind of a line
yes.
by saying these are the areas and
yes.
neighborhoods, the properties
yes.
that now will be within that
mm-hmm.
area? That's
but it's going to look at different time horizons,
mm-hmm.
which you can also use to look at different types of infrastructure. Because some infrastructure, maybe it's got a 30-year lifespan. Some's mm-hmm. probably got a 100-year lifespan.
Right.
A neighborhood, you're probably looking at a real, and we're going to look at that 1% chance. So the thing is, you can look at Sandy and say, okay, the odds of that storm mm-hmm. are going to become more frequent. But what if we just hold constant that we care about the 1% chance? And that's something that's mm-hmm. kind of ingrained with something that planners and the federal government and mm-hmm. municipal officials have used
and that's
for a long
what the
time.
FEMA maps are, is
right.
the 1%.
We basically say we can tolerate no more than a 1% chance. So we'll figure out where the line would be mm-hmm. for that one. If we spin that wheel,
right.
there's 100 slots, and we're gonna win/lose.
Right.
A 1% chance every year, or one time out of 100 years. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna hold that that wheel constant is going to be 100 slots, but we're going to move the line to correspond with holding that chance constant. So that's the 1% chance, the 1% storm, the 1% flood.
Right.
Then we also want to look at where's sea level going to be, and where are you going to have low level every day, every week, every month flooding.
Right.
Right. So there are places now that maybe they're flooding once a year when we get a nor'easter or a really heavy rain, and you can deal with that once a year. Then they're going to start flooding once a week, or they're just going to literally be underwater.
Wow.
So, so it's looking at both of those extremes
Right.
and trying to look at each facility, each major asset, and say, okay, what's the future hold for this?
Right. So kind of where we had the Blue Acres program, and now we've kind of determined, like, okay, that houses never should have been there in the first place.
Right.
And, we need to do something else with that area where we've been fortunate enough to have the people accept the Blue Acres program and buy out. So what you're saying is that we might find that go in a few blocks, and because the next time around, this might, what people who are saying, I never had a problem.
It might be.
It might be.
Or it might be that there's a key road that maybe it floods once a year
Right.
and blocks traffic, and you can live with that.
Right.
But you can't live with it when it's flooding once every 3 weeks.
And how far away is that?
And you might just
that
have to raise it.
1%.
Well, that's what this analysis will tell you.
Right.
Right. And the thing with the 1% is, if we accept the idea that, okay, we can live with getting massively flooded one set of every 100 years, or we can live with a 1% chance in any given year. Like, we can tolerate spinning that 100-slot wheel,
Right.
but we can't tolerate spinning a wheel that's only got 10 slots. You know what I mean? So if we accept that idea,
Right.
we can. The idea is that as the farther we go in the future, with more intense storms and higher ocean,
Right.
the line will just keep going higher up. So if we want to look at 2050, we'll still look at the 1% chance,
Right.
but the line will be in a different spot. If we want to look at 2075,
Right.
it's still a 1% chance that we'll look at, the line will just be in a different spot.
Yeah.
So there's other tools too, in addition to the vulnerability assessment. In fact, we're offering through Sustainable Jersey, and other partners throughout the state are offering similar tools. One of them is called ecologically based mitigation strategies. Yeah, it's a little bit of a mouthful, but simply it's just mean using the nature as a way of mitigating flood. And the idea is to use natural materials such as dunes or grasses or grass swales, bioswales. And what you do, it absorbs the water, it slows down the rate of water, so it manages stormwater, but it also, in return, that it protects habitats and it nurtures that kind of nesting habitat area for whatever type of wildlife it is. So that's something you might want to explore too in your Blue Acres area, as well as along the river corridors, Arthur Kill, the Raritan River, because that will help also stem some of the erosion that's going to occur.
I don't often think of dunes in Woodbridge. But,
no, I just wanted to give an example, though.
Wetlands,
Yes.
But
I
we
think
do wetlands are, and I was telling you before the show that we just hired Rutgers, their cooperative extension, to help us figure out what to do with the Blue Acres property that has been bought out. The residents who have remained are very concerned about what their neighborhood is going to look like, and their neighborhood is kind of gone. And so we have to find a solution that is, for them, aesthetic, but for us, scientific, and that it makes sense, and that we can find that balance.
And for anyone on the fence about whether or not to accept the Blue Acres buyout, I would say the sea level rise is not changing, but the government's ability to pay you for your house might be changing.
Right, exactly. And
So
not
get
only that,
out
and
while
the
you can.
possibility of them ever being able to sell it is quickly
That's right.
vanishing too.
Which also gets at the steps that individuals can take too.
Right, yeah. So we have a few minutes, about 4 minutes left, so let's talk about what the individuals can do.
Well, there are some things that they can do today, and they should be doing today, and that just starts with basic emergency preparedness, having flashlights and canned food and plenty of water on hand.
The Red Cross and FEMA both have great checklists for individuals and families on preparedness, and everyone should do
Exactly, and I know for one that I was not prepared for Sandy, and we were taking bottles of water out of the stream just to flush toilets and everything else. But I know it's something that we don't think about, but it's something we need to now. Other steps is knowing your neighbor, even if they're very close or not so close, exchanging phone numbers and keeping in contact, knowing where the emergency numbers are in the township, keeping up to date on the facts. And if you're in a flood-prone area, there are websites that have mapping tools. You don't need mapping software to look at where the flooding is going to occur on your property. And the facts, the data will continue to grow. The tools will be more sophisticated, and so numbers might change a little bit in days and months and years to come. So keep on top of the science behind it.
A couple of things that the municipality can do is you can get resilient energy systems. So New Jersey's got over 30,000 solar panels that all went dark when Sandy hit and the power went down because they didn't have a battery backup. And so the energy has to go into the battery, so it's there when you need it, even when the sun's not shining, and even when the grid goes down. We're encouraging municipalities to, and the state is as well, and hopefully there'll be money from the state, but we can't rely on that, that will help municipalities pay for these kind of resilient, redundant energy systems so that your critical facilities can stay on, but also so that there can be charging stations for people to come charge their phones. So there could be sort of lights on districts where people, when things are dark for a long time, you can show some movies and give people a break. Heating and cooling centers if the power goes out. And those are things people can do also individually in their homes. You can get these systems on your house.
So if you have solar
business.
Panels, there's a battery that you can attach to it that will store energy. So if the grid goes down,
that's right.
So explain that a bit.
Well, when the grid goes down, if your panel's wired directly into the grid, the panel goes down. It's like a garden hose. So putting one drop into a garden hose that's not pressurized doesn't help. But if you have that drop separate from the garden hose, you've got your drop. And so you need basically a wall. It's called an islanding inverter. That's a wall between your house and the grid. And so you've got your panel and a battery, and then like a little inverter that puts the power out into the grid when you want it to and does it when you don't want it to. And that will enable you to stay up and powered with your panel.
Wow.
Also, it'll enable you to have that power at night.
It's still expensive, right? But we're hoping the price will continue to go down.
Well, any technology when it's new,
well, if you have a large enough system right now, and if you get all your tax and government subsidies just right, it's basically free.
Wow.
The inverter?
Well, you know what? We're going to have to find out more about that and
The
put
whole
it on
system.
our website.
The whole system.
So I think this is probably a good place to wrap up, and we've given our residents a good tool and something to look into, and now you've given me a homework assignment so I can get it to everybody as usual, right? So it was, as always, Randy and Linda, it was great having you on. This was
my
very,
pleasure.
very informative.
Great.
And I think very helpful, too. So thank you. And thank you for watching Greenable Woodbridge. Thank you for being part of the change and part of the excitement.